and welcome to another episode of Victor's Corner. I am your host, Victor Omoayo, one half of the Codex Prime podcast, and today is Wednesday, June 28th, 2017, and I am very glad to be back with you all once again. As promised last week, we were going to come back today for another weekly dose of nerd culture goodness here at the Codex Prime podcast, but due to some scheduling conflicts on Carl's end, this will be a solo show this week, but we hope to be back again next week, as long as we continue to become, be consistent, bringing you that hot nerd fire each and every week, then, I think we'll be okay. As for today's episode of Victor's Corner, I do have a couple of film reviews that I'll get into momentarily, as well as some of the latest nerd headlines this week, including some drama on Disney and Lucasfilm's end concerning the Han Solo film, which is slated to come out next year. Now, since we're on Facebook Live, three of y'all, two. Well, I don't know. See, I'm looking at the Facebook Live right now, and I'm looking at my feed. And since I'm the one who started the feed, I can't see comments. So that's why I have my smartphone out, and I'm trying to log into Facebook so I can, see people's comments in real time. I'm not sure how this works exactly, but we'll figure it out as we go along, I suppose. Oh, the joys of technology! Isn't it fun? Okay, so let me see, 3 views. All right, write a comment. All right, and I see that we have John Haponic and Stephen Ho. Thank you guys. Welcome to the show. So I got a couple of film reviews for you all as of now. First of which, I really want to start with this pretty fascinating documentary, which is available on Hulu, and it's called Batman and Bill. And this is a documentary which is directed by Don Argot and Sheena M. Joyce. And when you think about Batman, who's the creator that first comes to mind? Normally, people will think that Bob Kane is the sole creator of Batman. That's the name that always comes to mind. And then when you read any publication that features Batman, whether it's a comic book or a graphic novel, or even if you watch any of the films, be it Christopher Nolan's trilogy, the Tim Burton films, any of the DC animated films, or even the animated series, you always see Batman created by Bob Kane. But as Batman and Bill, as the title indicates, turns out that Bob Kane was not the only person who created Batman and the whole universe as we know it. It turns out that there was a co-creator by the name of Bill Finger, who for decades, it wasn't until last year, he never received the credit that was due to him. And the documentary gets into why. And the thing that drives this documentary is this man named Mark Tyler Nobleman, who was an author, and he created this book called Bill the Boy Wonder, as well as Boys of Steel, which is the biographical book about the creators of Superman, Jerry Siegel and Joel Shuster. And Mark Nobleman, he's an author who, for years, the question bugged him as a Batman fan and as an author and as a comics fan and creator himself. Why was it that Bob Kane received sole credit and not Bill Finger? And so for years, he actually did a lot of research on Bill Finger's life, who he was, even got so far as to contact friends and family and even those in the industry who knew him and knew of him at the time. And it's a pretty insightful investigative documentary that kind of uncovers this, long hidden legacy of Bill Finger. And what was fascinating about this documentary was that even though Bob Kane was the one who received sole credit for creating Batman, and he was the one who publicly put himself out there as promoting Batman, he was the one who reaped all the monetary benefits of marketing and licensing the Batman name and the franchise. Bill Finger, on the other hand, received absolutely no money, no compensation for his work, and in fact, he died penniless all alone. And he was, for years, it was believed that he was buried in a pauper's grave, among other like homeless individuals and whatnot, and people who have no next of kin. And for decades, it was long thought that Bill Finger's legacy ended with him. And as you watch the documentary, it's fascinating to discover just how much of Batman that Bill Finger himself created, all the elements that we know of in the Batman mythos. In fact, there was one early scene in the film that kind of stood out to me the most, was where it showed Bob Kane, trying to create the Batman character, and his creation, his initial version of Batman was rather lame. It was basically this some dude in this red spandex getup with black underpants and like a black mask, and he had like stiff bat wings. It wasn't even a cape; it was just stiff wings. And when Bill Finger took a look at that, he was like, "All right, first of all, you got to change the color because he's a superhero who's representing a nocturnal creature. So what's with the red? He's going to stand out in the dark." So Bill Finger was the one who changed the initial color of the costume from red to gray, and later dark gray and black. And then he took off the stiff bat wings and replaced it with a cape, which resembled bat wings in the some of the earlier drawings of Batman, and also made that black. And he also replaced the lame mask with a cowl, and he added bat ears to it, and then hence Batman was born. And it doesn't stop there. It does not stop there. In fact, Bill Finger actually created much of the Rogues Gallery. For example, the Penguin, the Penguin, the Joker, I believe Catwoman, among many others. He even created the initial origin story of Batman, because when Batman was first published, there wasn't really much of an origin story to him, but Bill Finger later created the tragic origin story of Bruce Wayne, of being, a young boy who witnessed his parents being gunned down. He created that backstory that gives Batman his weight. And he even created the Dark Knight moniker, the Dark Knight nickname that we all know Batman as well. So even though Bob Kane for years received sole credit, it was Bill Finger who really put the finishing touches to the whole Batman universe as we know it. And in fact, throughout the documentary, when you hear and see clips of Bob Kane, being, in the public spotlight, hobnobbing with other creators and celebrities, reaping the benefits of what he claimed to be his work and his work alone, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth as a Batman fan, because it's like, I think about the quote that Bruce Wayne himself said in the film Batman Begins, where he said, "It's not who I am underneath, it's what I do that defines me." And by that metric, I gotta say Bob Kane was kind of a shit, because here was a guy who could have easily given Bill Finger his due, and enabled him to reap the benefits alongside with him. And mind you, when Bob Kane and Bill Finger were working in the industry in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s, many comic book companies employed many ghost artists and ghost writers. So you had many people who actually did the groundwork of creating these universes and creating these characters, and at the end, because of the way the businesses were run, only one person received the credit. So Bob Kane, he may have come up with maybe at least a couple of the ideas himself at best, but because he was receiving sole credit, he got all the benefits. Bill Finger himself got none of the reward. And in fact, there was another scene in the documentary as well, which was a little heartbreaking, was where they touch on the classic Adam West Batman show from 1966, and Bill Finger, he was working with another screenwriter, Charles Sinclair, and Bill Finger actually wrote one episode for the Batman TV series with Adam West. And as they were writing it, Charles Sinclair, he put his name first in the credit list, like written by Charles Sinclair and Bill Finger. And while Bill Finger was looking at this, he was like, just for once, I want to receive some sole credit. So so he asked Charles Sinclair, he's like, "Can you put my name first and then put your name underneath?" And then Sinclair was like, "All right, fine, no problem." And so when this particular episode aired, Bill Finger saw his name listed at the top, written by Bill Finger and Charles Sinclair, and that's where he kind of the documentary says that he kind of teared up, and that's where he, for once, received like a small semblance of victory, like a small sense of vindication that yeah, I made this. This is my universe. I'm seeing this on screen, and and also another great element of the documentary too was where it was depicting you know uh Bob Kane and Bill Finger's heyday. It actually when it creates scenes to kind of represent what happened, like dramatizations, if you will, it actually unfolds in the form of these golden age and silver age comics art style, and it kind of unfolds in that way, which I thought was really cool, which kind of adds to that old school touch. And um and watching this documentary, it really kind of shows how many artists, they there's like this divide, this deep divide between art and commerce, where there are many artists who are in it not just to make money, but just to, because they have something within themselves that they want to put out there to the public, to the universe, and they want to get their, creative, you know, creative fruits, out there for people to enjoy. And so that's where business comes in, where they kind of like butts heads with that, where nowadays if you do want to make it out into the public, not only is that hard enough, but it's like you also have to have a business sense in your head. So, as an artist, you kind of feel like you have to be part mercenary, if you know what I mean, where it's not just about the art. You also have to think about, okay, how can I market my work? How can I find ways to get soul credit for my work? How can I make money off my work? It's not just about the work itself. And that kind of falls into a slippery slope where you have some artists who feel that, if I'm not making money off my work, then my work itself is worthless. And that's kind of a tragic thing when you think about it. But that said, all artists, especially professional artists, do deserve their due compensation as well. I mean, nobody should work solely for free. Um, but watching this documentary, Batman and Bill, it's a pretty fascinating look into not only his life and legacy, but it also ends on a good note. Starting as of last year, any Batman story or merchandise, be it film or graphic novel, now Bill Finger actually receives co-credit with Bob Kane, and the first film that actually features Bill Finger's name is unfortunately Batman versus Superman: Dawn of Justice, which is a lame ass film, but the most positive takeaway was that when you watch the opening credits of that film, you see Batman characters created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. And that's the first film that actually features his name. So all subsequent Batman films and shows and graphic novels and comics from here on out will feature Bill Finger's name. And so in that case, it's thanks to the efforts of Mark Tyler Nobleman, as well as Bill Finger's heirs and his only daughter Athena, who actually pushed for Bill Finger to get credit. And I think this documentary is a really fascinating look into that. I don't know if DC, if they could retroactively put Bill Finger's name in previous versions of Batman, if they make more new copies or new prints of previous films like The Dark Knight or Batman. I think it's going to take a lot of work, but at least we get to see some vindication in that respect. So I do recommend checking out Batman and Bill. It is a Hulu documentary. It's available on Hulu. It's a pretty fascinating look. It's 90 minutes long, and it's a pretty good a fascinating insight into not only Bob Kane and Bill Finger and the Batman mythos and the legacy, but also a nice look into the golden age and silver age of comics as well, and that bit of history. Yeah. So it looks like we have Freddie and Aaliyah watching. So welcome you two to Victor's Corner. I do have another film that I do recommend, and this one's a little bit hard to find. The only way you can watch it is via Amazon. If you go on Amazon or Amazon Prime, you can rent it for I think it's like $4.99 or $5.99. But this is a French-Belgian film, which I'm sure that nobody I know personally would actually give it a chance because, it's probably too disgusting for them. It's a film called Raw. I'm not talking about Monday Night Raw. I'm talking about Raw. And this is a film starring Garance Marillier, who plays this college bound young woman named Justine, and this film was written and directed by Julia Ducournau. And in Raw, this young girl named Justine, she's a lifelong vegetarian. Her parents are strict vegetarians as well, and she's starting college, so she's starting her to make her way through veterinary school, this veterinary college. And in this college, she and a bunch of, and the rest of these incoming freshmen, these rookies as they're called, they're subject to these really bizarre and grotesque hazing rituals. Some of which include, getting cow's blood getting splashed on them, and other things. One of the hazing rituals involves eating raw rabbit kidney, of which Julia has no choice but to eat. And when she eats this piece of raw rabbit meat, she develops this allergic reaction. She gets rashes all over her skin, but then she eventually recovers. But then soon after, this lifelong vegetarian Justine, she starts developing a taste for raw meat. So there's a scene where she sneaks into her roommate's fridge and she gets this raw piece of chicken and just tears into it like a Slim Jim and just like going to town on it. And then you can see the look in her eye that this is not going to be enough. So she starts developing a stronger taste, if you will, for other forms of raw meat, particularly the living kind, and most particularly the human kind. So throughout the film, you're watching her succumb, or rather, start to discover, her inner cannibal. And so throughout the film, it starts to become this macabre and disturbing journey into self-discovery and finding out who she is, and embracing that inner savage. And it's a dark film, and it's both dark and it's also rather comedic at the same time. It's a film that you kind of engage with nervous laughter because you're not too sure where the story is going to go. And I don't feel like I don't want to reveal some of the more disturbing scenes that happen in the film, because I think that would kind of dull the impact if you do choose to watch this film, which I do recommend, by the way. Raw is a film that is really interesting in that it is about self-discovery. Like, it takes that whole trope of a young person, a young woman in particular, trying to find herself, trying to establish her identity, trying to make her way in the world, and discovering what she's good at and embracing her inner nature and her inner talents, and what she's capable of bringing to the world. And we've seen that kind of storyline developed before in numerous like coming of age stories, but not quite like in Raw. Raw takes it to the nth degree in many respects, and throughout the film, you're kind of seeing her just embracing her inner cannibal. In fact, there's another scene which involves her older sister attempting to give her a Brazilian wax, and that goes awkwardly to say the least. And that particular scene, there's some really disturbing revelations in that scene moving forward after that. And watching this film, it was really it had the appeal of a car accident. It's like I wanted to look away. It was really disturbing. There were times in which I was thinking, should I continue watching this? But then, especially there's a whole scene where she's eating her hair, and then in the next scene she's vomiting it all up in the toilet, kind of like a cat would, like she's coughing up a giant hairball. And I was thinking to myself, man, should I continue watching this movie? Then I'm like, yeah, I will. I mean, but I will say that like it's a film that it is disturbing, it is gross, it's not for everybody, but it is well made. It is well directed, and I think that the director Julia DeCurnow does a great job in, ratcheting up the tension. It's not about shock value too. So this is not like it's not a horror film that's just shock value for its own sake. It does have a point to make about being a coming of age story, and it's a film that I really can't recommend to anybody I know. I think, like, for example, Carl, who says, what self-respecting human being wants to watch a movie about cannibalism? And please tell me you weren't eating while you were watching this. Well, I was eating. I was eating a turkey and cheese sandwich with goat cheese, which is, and avocado dressing from Whole Foods, which smacks. But it was really good. I'm pretty sure John Haponic would not give this a chance. I mean, he refuses to watch the Neon Demon. Who knows why? But Raw is a film that I do recommend. It is a dark film. It's not for everybody. If you're soft, then I suppose there are other films you can watch, in your safe space. But I do recommend checking it out. It is one of the most distinct features of the year so far, and it is available currently only on Amazon via rental. I'm pretty sure we'll find it on Blu-ray eventually later this year. But if it is made more easily available, that I do recommend checking it out. Raw, that's the film. Raw and Batman and Bill. So yeah, those are my two film reviews, and we got a few nerd headlines to get into here. First of which involves a bit of nostalgia for y'all out there. Apparently, it is true. Nintendo has confirmed that they are launching the SNES Classic, which launches in September 29 this year for $79.99. That's $80 for you all out there. The miniature SNES console will include 21 games, including the unreleased Star Fox 2. And the 20 remaining games included are Contra 3, The Alien Wars, Donkey Kong Country, Earthbound, Final Fantasy 3, F-Zero, Kirby Superstar, Kirby Dream Course, The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, Mega Man X, Secret of Mana, Star Fox 1, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Super Castlevania 4, Super Ghouls and Ghosts, Super Mario Kart, Super Mario RPG, Super Mario World, Super Metroid, Super Punch-Out, and Yoshi's Island. Now that's a pretty hot lineup right there. I mean, I think you can't do much better than that, especially if it's all mainly first-party titles. Nintendo plans to ship the console, however, only from September 29 until the end of the year. But Nintendo did state that they will produce significantly more SNES Classic consoles than they did with the NES Classic. So the SNES Classic will be at least easier to purchase, or it's easier to find more copies than the NES Classic. So Nintendo says, but with their track record of artificial scarcity, I kind of find that hard to believe. Nintendo did say that their long-term efforts will be focused on the Nintendo Switch, hence the limited window in which you can purchase this console. Now before I get into my thoughts on the SNES Classic, Carl wrote here. He says, "Raw challenge: eat a full meal while watching that movie." That's no problem. I can totally do that. I mean, who wouldn't, unless you're soft. But anyway. The SNES Classic, I am a little bit interested in this console. Especially, I think the selling point for me is Star Fox 2. Star Fox 2 was a game that was completed by Nintendo and Argonaut Games. It was supposed to come out in 95 or 96, but it was canceled because the N64 was coming out, and they were also working on Star Fox 64, so they figured there wasn't any point in releasing a 16-bit sequel to Star Fox. For those who have the means, Star Fox 2 is available via ROM and emulator, so you can actually still play it right now, as I'm talking. You don't have to wait until September 29 to play it. but you didn't hear that from me. Um, I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna purchase an SNES Classic. Most likely not, to be honest. I think that this whole nostalgia train that Nintendo is on, first with the NES Classic and the SNES Classic. First of all, if you do have a PC and and emulators and ROMs, you can literally have all these games and more. You can literally have the entire SNES library at your fingertips if you wanted to. Now, I know there are some purists who say that, oh, they're not about ROMs and all this. They'd rather play the real game, which is fine. But I mean, what's more practical? Hunting an old console, spending the money, much of which prices are probably inflated too. Spending what 50, 60 on a SNES console, and then purchasing each of the games for like what 10, 20, 30 bucks a pop, maybe 40 to 50 or more for the more rare titles. Or you can just sit down, at your PC and play every single game if you wanted to. So I'm told. Not that I would know personally, but I have seen it. I think that the SNES Classic is good for not only for retro gamers, but also for the current generation of young gamers who perhaps have never played any of these games. I think I would highly recommend playing Super Mario RPG, which is one still not only a classic but also one of the best RPGs I've ever played. And you know what? I will say that I would much rather prefer playing Super Mario RPG than Final Fantasy VII. Which is a fact. I mean, you know what? Now that I think about it, Final Fantasy VII, justifiably is considered a classic. But I think that if the chips were down, if I really had to choose between which RPG I would be stuck with playing on a desert island, I would definitely pick Super Mario RPG over Final Fantasy VII. So there it is. Buy on Super Mario RPG, sell on Final Fantasy VII. But that's just my quick aside. So yeah, SNES Classic. If anybody's planning to buy it, hey, let me know your thoughts and let me know your stories of waiting in line and battling people to the death at Best Buy to get your hands on the console. Other nostalgia news right here. Sega Forever has been released. Sega has opened their Sega Forever service, which is online, which will offer every Sega developed game for free on the iOS and Android. Sega Forever will offer games from every Sega console ever made, from the Genesis and the Master System to the Saturn and the Dreamcast. The current games available for Sega Forever are Sonic the Hedgehog, Altered Beast, Phantasy Star 2, Kid Chameleon, and Comics Zone. Yeah, this is pretty cool. If you have an Android tablet or an iOS tablet, then yeah, feel free to play those games to your heart's content. I do believe that you can buy some Bluetooth controllers as well. So rather than having to wrestle with the touchscreen, I kind of dig this. Even though I only have an Android phone, so I'm not going to sit there and just try to play any of these games on a tiny screen. My thoughts about Sonic the Hedgehog, on last week's podcast. But I think that it's a good initial lineup of games. Comic Zone. I like the concept of Comic Zone a lot. It is one of the most difficult games I've played. But fortunately, I did beat it with the use of cheat codes. Hey, what are you gonna do? I did my best. I got to the third level of Comic Zone, without cheats, and then I guess got stuck there for a while. So I was just like, you know what, screw it. I'm just gonna, finish the game through with cheats, with an invincibility cheat, and see the ending. And I did, and it was all right. We got some comments here. John Haponic is rather incredulous at my claim of Super Mario RPG being the better one. John Haponic says Final Fantasy is the greatest, and he would much rather prefer Final Fantasy VII in a heartbeat. Good grief. Hey, listen, I'm not hating on Final Fantasy VII. I'm not hating on it at all. It's a damn good RPG. It is a classic. But I just prefer Super Mario RPG. That's just me. Tomato, tomato. Let's call the whole thing off. We got some other news. There is some latest news of Sony's Spider-Man cinematic universe. Sony is planning to create spin-off films of Spidey villains Kraven the Hunter and Mysterio. Carnage will also be the main villain in the Venom film, which stars Tom Hardy. And Sony film producer Amy Pascal also confirmed that Venom, as well as the Silver Sable and Black Cat movie, which will be directed by Gina Prince Bythewood, those films will not be part of the MCU. So it appears that so I would assume that Kraven the Hunter and Mysterio will also be part of Sony's MCU and not the official MCU, which is all right. As for a Kraven the Hunter movie, you never know. It could have potential. As far as a Mysterio movie is concerned, I was thinking about the best use of Mysterio, but then again, it would have to be, it would have to be part of the MCU. But I was thinking that if they were to introduce Mysterio to the on-screen Marvel universe, I think that the best way to do it would be to introduce him with not within Spider-Man, but within the Daredevil Netflix universe, because I think that the best use of the Mysterio character for me was Kevin Smith's Guardian Devil run of Daredevil in 2003 or so, and that featured Mysterio as the villain that was behind Matt Murdock's torment in that brief Guardian Devil run, and I thought that was pretty inventive, and that for me that was the best use of that character. Now, as for a Mysterio solo film, it could have potential if you develop the character as well as Kraven the Hunter more than just two-dimensional villains, that are just there to be victims of Spider-Man's, shit talking and web slinging. But hey, you never know. You never know where they might take these heroes or villains rather. Also, there are some latest details of Sony's upcoming animated Spider-Man film. Phil Lord and Chris Miller, which we'll hear from again in just a moment, they wrote the screenplay for the upcoming Spider-Man animated film. Bob Paraschetti and Peter Ramsey are also directing it. Liev Schreiber is voicing the yet-to-be-named villain, and Shamik Moore is voicing Miles Morales, a.k.a. Spider-Man, which is a pretty cool choice. Mahershala Ali and Brian Tyree Henry will voice Aaron and Jefferson Davis, respectively, Miles' uncle and father. And this animated film comes out December 14th, 2018. Hey, you know what? I think it's cool that we're gonna see Miles Morales, albeit in an animated form. Since Sony is creating their separate MCU universe, which is totally separate from the Marvel Cinematic Universe from Marvel Studios and Disney, why not just have a separate Spider-Man altogether? This is where you can introduce Miles Morales. Maybe you can cast Shamik Moore as Miles Morales in the live version and have him fight Venom at some point. Just an idea. And last bit of news here, which I want to get into just a little bit. There's been some drama behind the scenes for the Star Wars Han Solo movie, in which the directors of Phil Lord and Chris Miller have been fired by Lucasfilm executive Kathleen Kennedy. So apparently last Tuesday it was reported that Lord and Miller, who were the directors of 21 Jump Street, 22 Jump Street, as well as the Lego movie, they were both fired by Lucasfilm producer Kathleen Kennedy about 4 months into the production of the upcoming Han Solo film. The Phil Lord and Miller, they claim that they left the project due to quote-unquote creative differences. Reports have surfaced that Lord and Miller actually clashed with Kennedy as well as Lawrence Kasdan, the screenwriter of the Han Solo film, over the direction of the film. The directors wanted to approach the Han Solo film with a more comedic, improv comedic sensibility, much like you've seen in their previous films. And Lawrence Kasdan and Kathleen Kennedy, they opted for a more serious tone that adhered to the script. They were without any real deviation from the written word. Furthermore, Miller and Lord, they were not pleased with not being able to direct the Han Solo film the way they wanted to, and that they were pretty much underneath the thumb of Kennedy and Kasdan. Because of this, they were fired. And last Thursday, Lucasfilm announced that they replaced Lord and Miller with director Ron Howard. And Ron Howard is going to be taking over the film next month once the production resumes on July 10th. So Howard's going to direct the rest of the film, and he'll also finish the remaining 3 weeks left of shooting, along with an additional 5 weeks of reshoots. And also on top of that, more drama was reported that apparently the star of the film, Alden Ehrenreich, who plays Han Solo, you can also see him in the movie Hail Caesar by the Coens. Alden Ehrenreich also hired an acting coach on the set because Lucasfilm was not entirely satisfied with the performance that the directors were taking with his character. And and according to reports, that's a pretty unusual move for the studios to make so late into the production. So you're about 4 or 5 months into the production, and Lucasfilm decides, okay, you know what, we're not really feeling the direction that Ehrenreich's taking with the Han Solo character. We're not feeling how he's directed, so we're going to bring in an acting coach to kind of fine tune his performance. Which, if at that point, it kind of makes you wonder, well, wouldn't you have to end up reshooting the whole thing from scratch? Which I'm not sure Lucasfilm or Disney would want to do, because the film is still scheduled to come out next year on May 25th. So if they started from scratch, then they would have to delay the film, and which would cost them more money than they've already spent. Looking at this drama, it kind of brings up an interesting question where, okay, Lucasfilm is bringing these directors, like for example, in this case, Phil Lord and Chris Miller. I mean, they've seen their previous work. Their work is mostly comedy. Their work is mostly in the vein of just taking a script, not strictly adhering to it, but also leaving room for improvisation in the dialogue or in the scenes or how the scenes flow, and that's their style. Now, knowing that, and then you hire these directors to direct this Han Solo movie, and then you fire them for the very thing that they're known for, that comedic sensibility, for a more serious tone, that kind of raises the question about why hire these directors who have distinct voices or distinct approaches to filmmaking, knowing that you're not going to allow them to really use the very trademarks that they're known for. And also it brings another question. Okay, well, are you just looking for directors that are just hired guns, directors that don't have that much clout, directors that really can't, or rather would be unwilling to push back because for fear of not having these big budget opportunities ever again? It kind of makes you wonder, like, just what exactly is the overall vision that Lucasfilm is planning for their Star Wars films moving forward. Now it kind of makes me wonder about Rian Johnson and his take on Episode 8. Now, Rian Johnson, he's not only directing, but he's also the sole screenwriter for Episode 8, which is coming out in December. Now, it kind of makes me wonder just how much latitude was he allowed in creating the screenplay and in taking the reins of these characters. Is it a case where he kind of knows where his bread is buttered, and he's just basically letting Lucasfilm, tell him what to do as far creatively, and just going along with it with some creative flourishes of his own here and there wherever he can fit it in, or does he have more latitude than Lord and Miller? But the argument could be made that because Star Wars is not just a film franchise, it's this whole cultural and pop culture franchise and phenomenon and merchandising thing, this juggernaut where billions are on the line, and all these films strike a certain tone, and any film and each and every film has to adhere to that similar tone throughout. So you see, like, the sequel trilogy, the prequel trilogy, the original trilogy, they all have a similar tone in that respect, and there's no real deviation. So something can't be strictly comedic, something can't be extremely grim dark. There's always that one safe, middle of the road tone that Lucasfilm, has to take because there are billions on the line. Why take risks, creatively or narratively? But on the same token, it's like because you have so much money on the line, you have so much money to to spend. Why not take risks? I mean, besides, you're looking at these anthology films, which, by the way, aren't really breaking new ground. They're just revisiting old characters and old story threads that don't really need to be revisited, and they come off as non-essential films. They're less films and more corporate products. Case in point, Rogue One. Rogue One, which a lot of people do like, but that's a non-essential film. I mean, do we really need to understand to know the story about how the rebels got the plans to the Death Star? Of course not. All you got to do is watch A New Hope, and then there it is. It tells you the complete story there. I don't know where the need for a Han Solo film, for a young Han Solo film, it is, but beyond just money, beyond just making gobs of money hand over fist. I don't know. I mean, for me, I think that I think about the with this whole drama behind the firing of Lord and Miller and this Han Solo film. I'm thinking about the review that I watched from Red Letter Media, and then Red Letter Media, they did a review of Rogue One, and Rich Evans actually raised a really good point, and he said that the dirty little secret of Star Wars is that the universe itself is extremely limited. Now you have a galaxy, you have a whole galaxy full of lore. However, what do you see in every Star Wars story, be it film or print or television? You see stormtroopers, you see Jedi, you see lightsabers, you see the Rebel Alliance versus the Empire, or in this case, the Resistance versus the First Order. You see the Force, you see droids, and that's pretty much it. You see that across the board, everywhere you go. I mean, you would think that with such a seemingly a vast galaxy, that there could be room for much different stories within that Star Wars universe that doesn't necessarily have to rely on callbacks to Jedi and Sith, or the Empire and the Rebels, or those tried but true tropes that we've seen for the past 40 years. You would think that you would see much different stories that don't need to use any of those elements. You could still call it Star Wars, but what about the more, I guess, smaller, more personal stories that don't necessarily have dramatic galaxy wide stakes? What about the small character stories? What about like small ensemble pieces where it's just some people just struggling, just trying to survive? Um, what about a crew? What about a small crew of ragtag miscreants? Just traipsing the galaxy, getting into misadventures without necessarily running into the Empire or the First Order or what have you. I don't know. I mean, looking at this whole drama and seeing the fact that these directors, Lord and Miller, weren't allowed to direct the film that they wanted to. It kind of makes me think about my own fandom, my own Star Wars fandom. I think that after all these years, despite these movies coming out, I'm actually getting a little tired of Star Wars, if you ask me. Now, that being said, Episode 8 and Episode 9, which will conclude the sequel trilogy, I'll stick around for those films because I want to see how the story of Rey, Finn, and Poe and Kylo Ren will end ultimately. But when you see these anthology films, which are just just products, really, just ways to justify Lucasfilm's bottom line, and don't really have any narrative substance to them. You see, to a certain degree, these graphic novels of Star Wars, and comics, which are interesting, but I mean, am I really going to sit down and try to catch up with everything in the printed lore, even though they might take place, between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy? I don't, I don't know. I'm just getting tired of the whole thing. I'm getting tired. I'm getting tired of the whole marketing beast, this marketing juggernaut that is the Star Wars franchise. Now, I will finish the sequel trilogy. I'll stick around for those, but all these spin-off films and whatnot, you know what? If you're not gonna do anything different with these spin-off films, if you're just gonna revisit old characters and strike the same tone as the previous films, then really, what is the point? I mean, there's got to be more to it than just making money hand over fist. I mean, you would think that the Star Wars brand would sell itself. So you get people in the door with Star Wars, and then you can do something radically different that we've never seen before with it, and it might succeed, it might flop, but at least you've tried. But I don't know. What do I know? I'm not a businessman. I'm not a high powered executive, so I'm just thinking out loud. Spilling my thoughts into the ether, if you will. Uh, and as far as Ron Howard goes, lastly, I think Ron Howard's he's a very good filmmaker. I would recommend. Speaking of Ron Howard, I would recommend checking out his 2013 feature called Rush, which stars Chris Hemsworth and Daniel Bruhl. I thought that was a pretty overlooked film. I recommend checking that out. Um, and Ron Howard's pretty reliable. I don't know how much of his take of his approach would directly influence the film as a whole, because it sounds like Lord and Miller pretty much shot the majority of the film, majority of the script so far. So it does bring up an interesting question whether or not we'll be able to see either just one cut of the film with just like the Ron Howard cut, and even then, would Ron Howard himself only receive sole directorial credit, or would it be a case where all three directors get credit at the end? And it also brings up another question: will we be able to see two versions of the Han Solo film? Will it be the Ron Howard version and the Lord and Miller version as well? Would there be two competing versions on the market? Time will tell. But you know what? We'll just see how that unfolds moving forward. So, if and when this Han Solo film comes out next year, then hopefully the film will at the very least be enjoyable and not have such a schizophrenic tone, which it sounds like it's gonna have. If you're talking about the comedic sensibilities of Lord and Miller and the dramatic sensibilities of Howard, I don't see how the film's gonna come off as cohesive. But you know what? Like I said, time will tell. We'll have to wait until May of next year. Uh, let's see. So, yeah. So that about concludes this week's episode of Victor's Corner. And once again, thank you all for tuning in. You can also email the show at codexprimepodcast@gmail.com. And also, you can also check us out on Facebook, obviously, SoundCloud, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. Am I missing something? I feel like I always feel like I'm missing something with this rundown. I think that's pretty much it. Uh, do I have a question of the week? I don't know if I have a question of the week, to be honest. See, I was thinking about I was thinking about doing a question of the week before starting this, but I really couldn't come up with anything. Um, I don't know. Well, okay, all right. Here's one. Question of the week. Since we're halfway through 2017, what is your favorite film of 2017 so far, and what is the film that you're looking forward to seeing the most in the second half of this year? So let us know in the comments below, or let us know via codexprimepodcast@gmail.com. Once again, thank you all for tuning in. I'm Victor Omoayo, and this was Victor's Corner. Hopefully, we will see you next Wednesday at 1 p.m. On the Codex Prime podcast. Just to let you know, all throughout the month of July, the Codex Prime podcast will be on Facebook Live Wednesday afternoons at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then once August rolls around, we will be back to our regularly scheduled recording time at 6 p.m. on Tuesdays. So once again, thank you for tuning in. I'm Victor Omoayo. Peace out, nerds.